Frost & Sullivan, we're a market research company. We would look at the urban environment through an ICT lens, so that's what I'm going to do now. And what always strikes me about looking at this area and from listening to the presentations this morning is the timescales involved. So when you look at urban planning, you're looking 10, 20, 30 years out at least. When you look at ICT, we're used to thinking about Moore's Law and everything else. Things happen really, really quickly. But actually, when you look historically, what happens is every 10 years or so, there's a sort of punctuation, something new emerges, a new generation of something happens. But in the meantime, there's so much experimentation and innovation. So what strikes me is how is it possible to plan an urban environment looking that far into the future when in parallel the technology is changing all the time? And the answer is you can't very successfully do that. So clearly the imperative is to make sure cities are adaptable, that cities can spot when there's a new technology that is really going to be helpful and be able to evaluate it and absorb it. And I think that's the real change. It's not about so much picking winners. Okay, so I want to return to the theme of the event, which is the live, work, move theme. And if we think about that in London in 2025, we can think about it in terms of three directions, if you like, of disruptive technologies. So transformation through automation, integration, and then thirdly, platform-enabled business models. Now, we have already touched on these with the previous speaker, but if I just take one of the contexts, so connected living, if we look at automation, so you think of the home having perhaps energy management, security management, smart appliances, and so on. So these systems are sort of looking at our habits. They're making subtle adjustments for our comfort and convenience and so on. And they're spotting anomalies. That's something that's going to become much more prominent. So you come home, or someone comes home at an odd time of the day, and this is unusual. Does it alert your security system? This kind of thing. So that's automation in the home. And then thinking about integration, as the speaker from Cubic said, it's so important, this idea of multimodal integration, and that also applies to the home, which allows you to start thinking about blended services. So for instance, monitoring your health and linking that to your insurance, that sort of thing, or the fridge that orders groceries or what have you. Now, the thing about the integration, it can happen at the network level, the application level. Increasingly, we think it's going to be happening at the data level, and that's really fundamentally what the Internet of Things is all about. But it does open up all kinds of different services that wouldn't have existed before. And this extends outside the home as well. When you're talking about connected living, that includes your personalized transport and also the way you move through the city. And then thirdly, and this is the commercial aspect, is platforms that enable new kinds of business models. This is where you have a layer, technology layer. It's sort of the Uber model, if you like, and you're able to match supply and demand. You have suppliers on the platform. You have users on the platform, all kinds of intermediaries, and that's where you see services that you could call home as a platform or lifestyle as a service. And these are dynamic, personalized services with multi-sided business models. So these sort of three areas, they apply equally to the world of work, and I'll come back to that in a minute. And also, as we've heard, to transportation. So just looking at one area, looking at automation, predictive optimization, all the speakers have alluded to this. So looking at the actual technologies underneath what we mean by automation, and here I really am looking further ahead to sort of 2025 type of timescale. You know, if you think about a transport system, okay, that is optimizing itself, it's making predictions and so on, it's closed loop. But what we would like to highlight when we talk about cities as systems is the importance of machine learning, which is really taking this to a whole new level, really. It's about a whole new level of autonomy. And my question would be, are cities really quite ready for this? Because it might not necessarily be that far away. And what we mean by machine learning, this is pattern recognition as a basis for learning, optimizing processes, and ultimately making decisions. So if we imagine by 2025, we could have swarms of drones that are talking to each other and negotiating airspace. You'll have vehicles that are autonomous but understand the world around them. So they understand what objects are, they recognize them, they understand how they're moving around. And what then happens is when you start to think, well, how does this come together with other advanced technologies such as robotics, where you have devices that can move themselves and are able to learn about the environment and then decide for themselves how they want to move. So they're gathering information about the local environment, combined with the learning capacity of these technologies, and then combining that again with something like, say, the blockchain, where you have a distributed, you may be aware of this, a distributed ledger. Perhaps it's more of a concept than a reality at the moment. It's come out of cryptocurrency. But when you combine all these three areas, what that then gives you is a very intelligent learning machine that is able to make deals, is able to broker contractual relationships. So we think this has quite a fundamental set of implications for cities, because you have machines that are trusted actors in the system. And on top of that, where do the humans fit in? We will certainly see new kinds of interfaces that help us interact with these systems. Okay, I just want to return briefly to the world of work. You may have been talking about this earlier in the day anyway, but automation clearly has implications for employment, and we need to think what that might mean. For example, talking about automation and self-learning systems, there's a VC firm that has actually appointed an algorithm to its board of directors. So the algorithm votes on how they should balance the portfolio. If you take something like IBM Watson and put that on the board, which I think would be a natural application of Watson, then not only could it take decisions based on information, but it could also analyze the personalities of the other board members. So there's all kinds of employment implications all the way up and down. You know, knowledge workers are certainly affected. So broadly speaking, there's kind of two views on impacts on employment. One is it's relatively benign. Labour markets have always adjusted. And a data-driven economy will create new roles, data scientists and so on. But equally, there's the more pessimistic view that in this case, the labour market might not be able to adjust fast enough, and that actually the kind of jobs that go initially are the routine tasks, such as particularly information processing, quite sort of straightforward tasks for a computer. But what's happening at the same time is the concept of routine is expanding a lot. So you have complex self-learning technologies that can make complex decisions, and the idea of what's routine and not particularly difficult is expanding all the time. So if those jobs are going to be replaced, it's not only about data entry type of functions. So I think, as these percentages show, I think at the moment it's fair to say we don't know. Is it a pessimistic situation or an optimistic situation? The temptation to say, well, somewhere in the middle, but probably it's more like it will be both. There will be pools of the employment landscape where jobs are certainly lost and whole industries disappear. There will be others where people will do very well. It's not going to be a straightforward situation, but it's certainly something that policymakers need to be aware of. I'm probably running out of time, but I just wanted to talk a little bit about technology and the way it's adopted. We've talked about Internet of Things and so on, data analytics, but as I say, I'm really looking a little further out. If we take the trend of, which is what the dotted line here is about, of the ubiquity, capacity and flexibility of networks, of processing power, and also at the same time around power, energy harvesting and so on, these are the critical enablers. And then on top of that, you look at the interdependencies of technology, and you can start to map out, well, when a certain technology is going to really, really be visible in our cities and have momentum. I think it depends how you define momentum. But really the point I wanted to make here, and probably you would all think this way anyway, but it's not a matter of being technologically deterministic here. Technologies don't change anything, actually. There has to be a whole set of things that are in place before a technology can even be diffused. So you need to get beyond proof of concept. You need financial support, you need public awareness and so on. So I just wanted to emphasize that point that we wouldn't say technology is driving any of this really. So just lastly, I did want to talk about housing, but probably there isn't time for that. Maybe it will come up in the panel discussion, but certainly in the ICT industry, we talk about energy management, all kinds of different things. No one talks about housing, and certainly I would like to see my industry start to think about that problem, because it clearly is the critical issue for cities, looking at population growth and so on. But what I did want to say, technology disruption is the way a city needs to transform. Is it actually just like cities, companies are doing right now? Is almost every industry is having to grapple with the consequences of disruptive technology. And I would say yes, it is, in as much as it's all about the adaptability of internal resources, processes, the goals, the culture, etc. But obviously, it's also very, very different in that the range of stakeholders and objectives is so much broader. So just in conclusion, cities' problems, you've been talking about that today, how complex and interdependent they are. Technologies can provide ever-improving tools, really incredible tools, but they won't drive change on their own. But nonetheless, what will certainly happen is radical solutions will emerge, almost as side effects, and they won't necessarily be anticipated. So it's very important to be tracking what's going on. And then just to back up what I think nearly all the speakers have said, is that data is really the key to everything. So who owns it? Who has the right to it? How is it going to be traded? These are the key questions that haven't yet been answered, I think.